You're listening to Jay's Analysis, integrating film, philosophy, geopolitics, literature, history, economics, intrigue, and espionage, only at jaysanalysis.com. And now, Jay's Analysis Podcast, with your host, Jay Dyer.
I am here to chew nicotine bubblegum and to kick ass. And because I'm not smoking, I'm going to suppress my nicotine desire to kick ass as we analyze They Live, the classic cult film from John Carpenter starring Rowdy Roddy Piper. As you can see, I have my They Live glasses. So you and I, audience-wise, we're going to have an hour-long fight scene as we try to decode this film. If you recall, this film has the longest fight scene ever. It's an infinite fight scene between Rowdy Roddy Piper and the black dude. So, but we're not going to talk about the fight scene. We're going to talk about the movie and what the movie tells us about reality, and that's quite a bit, actually. So is this actually a documentary? Put your glasses on, and let's see. To date, I think I've only analyzed 2 John Carpenter films, Big Trouble in Little China, The Pork Chop Express, Prince of Darkness with Donald Pleasance, and then, of course, my friend Bronco at Jay's Analysis has covered The Thing. He did a really good analysis of The Thing. But I think it's admittedly absurd that I've not yet covered They Live on a website that's dedicated to deep state conspiracies and connections behind film. Now you want to go ahead and order my book here, Esoteric Hollywood. It's now available. Everything's complete. You can get that at Trine Day Publishers or at Amazon. Just search for Esoteric Hollywood and Jay Dyer. And I think that as we look at They Live, a lot of this will probably be obvious, but I think aspects of the film are probably missed. And as our world gets crazier and crazier, it's really like we're living in a dystopic B-movie. It really, really, really is. Seemingly the case. And the film, if we look at it, begins with this sort of Banksy-style graffiti, where you have this underground movement, the underground that's present in every dystopic movie, and the sort of anti-establishment proletariat, replete then with its own subculture of signs and symbols. And if you look at graffiti culture, read some articles on it, it's really fascinating because it exists basically in every city, and it's often kind of dismissed as trashy, sort of low-class stuff. But often hidden within this is a lot of mystic symbols, and it's another kind of language. It's a language of codes and ciphers, and it functions to kind of alert other gangs and groups in the know. So signaling gang territory, other black market operations. This is what graffiti embodies. It's a kind of a crude form of NSA cryptography or something like that. There was a great article at Listverse that talked about graffiti that I recommend reading at my article. And it said, gang graffiti in Los Angeles is not random vandalism. To those who know how to decipher this secret language, the markings are actually the newspaper of the street that reflect the territorial boundaries, rivalries, and allegiances. Law enforcement officers have even used the secret messages to solve crimes. So it goes on to say, often the names of the gangs are shrouded in code, and the monikers will even use things like Roman numerals, Mayan numbers, and so forth. Gang graffiti began in LA with the emergence of Latino factions 70 years ago. It was simply a way of glorifying the organization and marking out your turf. Black gangs quickly contributed to this language, and by the 70s and 80s, you had the peak of the graffiti movement. So this is interesting because that's the beginning of They Live as the underground the resistance, sort of marking their territory and letting people know in a veiled way that the establishment is corrupt. And there's a marked difference between gang graffiti and the work of taggers. Taggers engage in coded language and vandalism, but theirs is more of an art than it is something connected to the criminal world. The LA Times, I think, talks about this. However, differentiation is complicated by the fact that taggers often paint gang-controlled walls. So those fluent in the visual cryptolect of LA gangs can understand this stuff. Very fascinating subculture. Now, when it comes to the character of Rowdy Roddy Piper, I'm reminded of the fact that I went to high school with a dude that had messed up teeth, and we called him Rowdy Roddy Tooth. This has no relevance to the analysis, but I still think it's funny to this day. Just a tribute to my own clever bad jokes. As for wrestlers, the 80s, this was all about wrestling. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. Remember No Holds Barred, right? Remember Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan on their big match, and the Ultimate Warrior, and oh yeah, the Macho Man. All these goofy characters. Nothing more 80s than that, but I think of quite a few of these characters moved into politics. Jesse Ventura, and yes, even Donald Trump. You can see in my analysis I included, thanks to Chris over at Hoaxbusters, the clip of Donald Trump shaving Vince McMahon's head in WWE or whatever.
And another straight right to the throat, right to the neck. A Stone Cold Steve Austin. What's going on over here? Donald Trump is in a world he is not familiar with. This is not real estate. This is the WWE.
Anyway, you can go ahead and watch the rest of that clip where Donald Trump shaves the head of Ed McMahon, okay? Now, if you were unaware, as I said, Trump was a WWE figure, and what you start to see is that how smooth the transition is from Hollywood to politics. There's Ronald Reagan, there's Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's Jesse Ventura, and now Donald Trump. And of course, Rowdy Roddy Piper in his latter days was speaking out when it came to political issues and appearing on, folks, we got Rowdy Roddy Piper on the Alex Jones show today. It is going to be unbelievable. Okay, folks. Folks, They Live is not it's not a movie, it's a documentary, folks. Okay. Now, I'm just waiting, though, for the Coco Beware Erwin R. Shyster presidential ticket, and then I'll probably start voting again because I'll have my confidence restored. But if you remember the 80s, there was also an interesting B movie with Rowdy Roddy Piper called Hell Comes to Frogtown, and it's relevant because it's another conspiratorial B movie where all the males have been sterilized, so it kind of fits into that depopulation agenda. But when you come back to They Live, as with so many John Carpenter flicks, you have this omnipotent street preacher that's always there. There's always a street preacher who's preaching some apocalyptic foreboding message. You see this in Prince of Darkness and in Escape from New York or LA, if I recall. And so there's been an economic collapse. It's wiped out the working class, kind of similar to Running Man in a way. Piper plays John Nada, an aimless drifter looking for work who refuses to join a union. Similarly, the underground resistance works with these churches, it seems, to establish a kind of opposition that can, quote, hack the signal, something that we saw also in Running Man. And this was, of course, intended to awake the masses. This is a staple of every dystopian film that, oh, if you can just get on the radio, if you can just hack the signal, if you can just get the message out, it'll awaken the masses. But, of course, that's not how human psychology works. The masses don't just merely awaken. And a lot of times, it's actually a revelation of the method. We know from Hoffman's book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. But the hack transmission is pretty good. It actually states more or less what is really going on. And it reads, our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The movement began 8 months ago by a small group of scientists who discovered that signals are being sent through the television. Now, this is actually true. You can find articles on the patents behind the Monkey Labs in Bastrop, Texas, and other places where they tune the frequencies of the television signals, especially the HD, to put you into an alpha state, which in brainwaves is the lowest suggestible state. That's all true. They have created a repressive society. The poor and the underclass are growing. Their intention is to rule with the annihilation of consciousness. Now, that's important because that echoes the statement of Bertrand Russell in his works, the infamous atheist philosopher and, quote, logician, who said that the spirit of man would have to be stamped out, echoing Orwell's 1984 and what O'Brien says to Winston. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent, apathetic, so forth. Their primary method is survival, so social Darwinism, especially this. You see this actually in John Carpenter's Children of the Corn, or not Children of the Corn, Village of the Damned, excuse me. In John Carpenter's Village of the Damned, you see that come up as well, the whole social Darwinistic aspect of stamping out anyone that's deemed lesser. And it says they want to keep us asleep, selfish, and sedated. Now, this is actually true. This is what Madison Avenue and Bernays and the Pentagon and these other entities have cooked up as the means by which you can rule the masses, by making them atomized and keeping them in a narcissistic, egoistic state, only concerned with hedonistic pleasures. They're dismantling the middle class. That is true. Keeping us sedated, Brave New World, all the drugs. More and more people becoming poor. That is true. We are their cattle, bred for slavery. The revolution cannot break their signal. Our transmitter is not powerful enough. They must shut off the signal at the source. And this is, of course, what the film will be concerned with, is Rowdy Roddy Piper's quest to stop the signal. Now, I want to play this clip because it's relevant to what we've been discussing with the Army and Pentagon insofar as they do embed PSYOPs officers at local news stations, and this is precisely what you see in the film.
The U.S. Army has used local television stations in the U.S. as training posts for some of its psychological operations personnel, according to Yahoo News blog The Upshot. Since at least 2001, both WRAL, a CBS affiliate in Raleigh, North Carolina, and WTOC, a CBS affiliate in Savannah, Georgia, have regularly hosted active duty soldiers from the Army's 4th Psychological Operations Group as part of the Army's Training with Industry program. Training with Industry is designed to offer career soldiers a chance to pick up skills through internships and fellowships with private businesses. The PSYOP soldiers used WRAL and WTOC to learn broadcasting and communications expertise that they could apply in their mission, as the Army describes it, of, quote, influencing the emotions, motives, objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of foreign audiences.
Yeah, right. Foreign audiences is actually for the American public, of course, as well as foreign audiences. Think of Operation Mockingbird. Now, there's a great quote by Jacques Ellul in his famous book, Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes, where Ellul says when the American producer makes a film, he has a certain definite idea he wants to express, which is not always intended to be propaganda, but rather the propaganda element is the way of American life itself, with which he is permeated and with which he expresses in his film. Without realizing, we see here the force of the expansion of a vigorous society, which is totalitarian in the sense of the integration of the individual, which leads to involuntary behavior. That is exactly what this movie is about. So I thought that quote from Ellul was very appropriate. And then I go on to cite Brzezinski and Michael Aquino in their documents that discuss electromagnetic warfare, non-lethal weaponry, and so forth, and how that would be utilized through for mass control. And that's exactly what this film is about as well. You can read those quotes in my analysis, so I won't labor through all those. But it's interesting, too, that it's a perpetual, total panopticon, perpetual surveillance society. So you have these they live surveillance drones that kind of float around. They look like little, like coffee pots or something that with a little eye flying around. And once John Nada has his They Live glasses, he's able to see these. And it reminded me of, of course, once he's seen, they say have that famous scene where they say, we've got one that's awake, he can see. And then he's portrayed on TV as a terrorist. Now, this reminds me of all these fake Pentagon-run ISIS videos, and you can see the article where I cited from Sean Helton at 21st Century Wire, where the Pentagon paid a PR firm $540 million to create all these fake terror videos, and this is now admitted. We've been writing about that for the last 3 years, and now it's admitted. And so I go on to talk about the sort of the geoengineering, which is hinted at in this film, because they say that they want to make Earth's atmosphere like the aliens. Now, I don't believe in aliens, but in the sense of the scientific elite having a kind of death wish with destroying nature and modifying it in GMOs and all that. I think that the geoengineering is hinted at in this film, and you can read my article that's linked here about chemtrails and all that, where I try to document it. I also think that there's a spiritual aspect to the film, given the church symbolism and the way that the Bible at least talks about demons. Basically the same thing, I think you could argue in one sense. And then we have that, of course, that bizarre opening ceremony for the underground base, because if you recall in the film, John Nada ends up in an underground base that is a kind of breakaway civilization. So you can read my or watch my lecture on breakaway civilization in Hollywood that I did last year at a pretty large conference, and that video is linked as well. I would definitely recommend watching that if you haven't seen any of my stuff, and then checking out my book. But of course, the Critical Theorist Guide to Board wrote in his famous book, Society of the Spectacle, there was a quote that I think was very appropriate to this film. And he said, "The spectacle cannot be understood as an abuse of the world of vision, as a product of the technique of mass dissemination of images. It is rather a Weltanschauung, or the worldview, which has become actual and materially translated. It is a world vision which has become objectified. The spectacle presents itself simultaneously as all of society, as part of society, and as an instrument of unification. As a part of society, it is specifically the sector which concentrates all gazing and consciousness. Due to the very fact that this sector is separate, it is the common ground of the deceived gaze and of false consciousness, and the unification it achieves is nothing but an official language of generalized separation." And basically what Guy is saying here is that the mass media, which is what They Live is about, is the means of control, Hollywoodism, so to speak. And they even mention in the film, we will have global government by 2025. So thank you for listening. Check out Jay's Analysis. You can subscribe for $4.95 a month or $60 a year to get my lectures, talks, and interviews. Philosophy, film, geopolitics, the esoteric, all the above. You can also get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. Thanks for listening.